Yellow cake or egg yolk cake is really simple to make. It takes a lot of egg yolks and it's perfect when you're trying to find a recipe to use up all those eggs. Preheat your oven to 350 or 180 degrees Celsius and we're going to prep a pan. You need to grease and flour it or line it with parchment paper. I like to use the wrappers of the butter and just rub it around the pan until you get a nice coating. You want to do a very thin coat, but you want to make sure every bit of it is covered. And then you're going to add in some flour and then just dust it off. I personally like to do this over top of the sink so it doesn't make a lot of mess. You don't need a lot of flour, maybe about a teaspoon's worth or a little more. And you just rock it around and then tap the pan to get the excess off. Now, I personally don't like to grease and flour cake pans because I found that it tends to make the crumb on the outside a little bit darker than I like. So I usually just line the bottom with parchment paper and loosen the sides after it's baked. In a medium bowl, let's add in 1 2/3 cup of flour, 250 grams. To that, add 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 8 grams, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt, or 2.5 grams. You can use self-rising flour, just omit the baking powder and salt. Mix this up until it's well combined and then you're going to set it aside. Now the type of flour I'm using is just regular all-purpose flour. Now you are going to separate your eggs. Some people say that you should not separate the egg yolks by passing them shell to shell because it can contaminate them. Another way that you can separate the egg yolks is to put the egg yolk into your hand and let the egg whites slip between your fingers. It's a much messier method, but you get less egg whites in your egg yolks that way. Once you get these all separated, you're going to move on to the next step. The egg whites are not needed for this recipe, so just cover them and place them in the fridge. In a large bowl, we're going to need 1 cup of softened butter, that's 226 grams, and to that we're going to add 1 1/4 cups of sugar, or 250 grams. And we want to beat this until it is nice and smooth and creamy. Once it looks like this, we're going to start adding in those egg yolks. Now to keep it from curdling, you want to put in the egg yolks one at a time. This is going to be a very rich cake that tastes a lot like egg yolks. If you like yellow cake, you'll like this cake. If you don't like eggy cake, you will not like this cake. So please don't waste all these egg yolks if you don't like the taste of egg in your cake. I do recommend other recipes for that. Just a plain old sponge cake is wonderful. This is a recipe to use up your egg yolks, and it's a very rich, decadent cake. You want to beat each egg until it's nice and smooth and it no longer looks curdled. This takes a while, but it's well worth it. You want the batter to be nice and fluffy and full of air, or it will be a dense cake. You want it to look like this in the end. After that, you're going to add in your vanilla. We're using 2 teaspoons or 10 milliliters, and then add in our flour mixture from before. You want to mix this for 1 minute or until it's well combined and looks like this. We are now going to put this in our prepared cake pan and level it out the best we can. The better that you level it, the less likely it will crack in the end. Take your time here and try your best. It's not the end of the world if your cake ends up domed. You can always level it off at the end, or you can just cover it. No one really cares when it's homemade. It's all about the taste. If you need to use your finger to get the batter off, that's okay. As long as your hands are clean and you are cooking this to temperature, you won't have any issues with contamination. Some people are really finicky about that, and if you are, you don't have to use your fingers at all. But I have found there's not one really good way to do this unless you leave some cake batter behind in your pan. If you have an offset spatula, it works wonders for leveling a cake. If you don't, just use whatever equipment you have. A spatula or a spoon will work fine. Now, as I said before, I'm not a fan of flouring and greasing a pan because it does leave a darker crust when you bake this. Bake the cake 30 to 40 minutes or until a toothpick inserted comes out clean and the sides of the cake just starts to separate from the pan. The top should be golden brown and the center should read between 200 to 210 Fahrenheit or 93 to 99 degrees Celsius. You want to cool this in the pan for 5 to 10 minutes and then remove it to a wire rack to finish cooling. Now there may be some cracking in this cake, and that's perfectly normal for that many egg yolks. It's just the way that the recipe works, and it's not a huge deal. All you have to do is just cover it up or cut that place off. Now see how it's a lot darker than I would prefer? That is from the flour mixture on the sides. I'm just not a fan of greasing and flouring the sides of a cake. Flip it right side up and then let it cool completely before you start with your frosting. You're going to need a half a cup of softened butter or 113 grams. To that, you want to add a quarter teaspoon of salt or 1.25 grams if it's unsalted butter. If it's salted butter, please omit it. I'm leaving it out because my butter is salted. Next, we're going to add in a little bit of powdered sugar, 4 cups worth, 500 grams, but you want to add it a little at a time until it is nice and creamy. If you add it all in at once, it's going to look like this. It's going to be a hot mess. It's going to be very crumbly and dry, and you have to fix it by beating it constantly. You don't want to add milk in right away because if you do, you're going to get the texture all wrong. And this is really hard on your mixer, so I recommend you take your time and add it in just a little bit at a time. Once it looks like this, it clings to your beaters a lot, you're going to add in that vanilla, 1/2 teaspoon or 2.5 milliliters. You are going to add 3 tablespoons of milk or 45 milliliters. You may need to add a little bit more or less depending on how thick or thin you want your frosting. I recommend adding the milk 1 teaspoon at a time so you get the consistency you're looking for. As I was saying before, you could cut off this top where it's domed and cracked, or you can just do what I'm doing and just ice it, and nobody really cares. Unless you are making professional cakes, I say don't waste what you have. I am the world's worst at decorating cakes, but I figured I'd just show you how I do this and why I don't often show you how to decorate things. I am not skilled with decorations. There's a lot of wonderful YouTube channels dedicated to just decorating cakes, and I recommend checking them out if you are interested in learning how to decorate a cake. I will teach you how to make a delicious tasting cake, but I am very limited in my skills with decorations. So take that with a grain of salt. I just smear on the buttercream the best I can until I get a nice even layer. I think it still looks decent for someone that's an amateur. Let's cut into this cake and see what it looks like. For all those egg yolks, this is a very soft, delicate cake. It just melts in your mouth and it's very delicious. As you can see, the crumb texture is pretty dense, but it is surprisingly light to taste. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. Here are your ingredients if you want to follow along. Thank you for visiting us at jacksonsjob.com, and as always, happy baking.